And good morning, MYM Insiders. How you doing today? This is Rich Harshaw, and we are here today for our MYM Insider webinar. A good webinar today. We're going to borrow from a book that you'll see on your screen. It's called The Non-Designer's Design Book, written by Robin Williams, not the comedian who's no longer with us, but the designer book author who ostensibly is with us. I don't really actually happen to know that, but this is a great book if you are interested in creating marketing materials that have visual impact. This is, in my opinion, the place to start. I strongly encourage you, as you will see on the next slide, buy it now. Okay, go onto Amazon.com, get this book. We're going to go through it. I'll give you a summary, an overview. We'll go through many of the principles. But I think that if you're serious about this topic, owning this book and taking the time to read through it would be very, very helpful. Now, this is one of those kinds of books that is very easy to read because most of it is pictures. But the pictures are augmented by text that are explaining what's going on in the pictures so that you can learn the principles more easily. So, again, just by way of prefatory comment, strongly recommend that this is a book that you put in your library, read it, get a good feel for it. And we're going to split this webinar into two sections. We're going to go through the first half of it today. We'll go through the next half of it either next month or the following month. I can't remember right now. I don't have the calendar in front of me. But we're going to go through this. This will be a pretty short webinar. No need to belabor these points for any longer than necessary. But I think you'll find these principles to be pretty commonsensical. But again, just because something's commonsensical, because you can sit there and look at it and understand it, doesn't mean that you understand the principles behind it. So that's the purpose of the webinar, is to explain some of the principles behind some of this stuff. Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. We'll start with a concept called proximity. Now, the way that I'm going to roll through this on the webinar is I'm just going to show you examples literally from the book. And hopefully I will not be accused of ripping this book off, since I am giving you full disclosure that this comes directly from the book, and I am strongly encouraging you to go buy this book. So proximity is a principle that simply tells us that the eye will go to certain places on a page based on items' proximity to one another on that page. So we've got the example on the screen of my flower list, and you see that on the left-hand side, the flower list has approximately 10 items, and the list on the right has the same 10 items, but we see that they are grouped into 6 and then 4. We don't necessarily know why they're grouped, but we can see based on the grouping that the person writing this, putting this piece together, designing this piece, wants us to see that there is some sort of visual distinction between the first list and the second list. So take a look at a business card to illustrate this example. This is the Mermaid Tavern. We've got the name on the left-hand side. We've got the phone number, and we've got sort of a bunch of information all strewn about. Now, it is easy to tell what is the most important thing on this business card, but we don't really understand the relationship of the other things because they're sort of strewn randomly about in a way that makes it harder to understand what the connection with those different pieces of information is. So we go to the second example, you'll see that we have now bolded the name. So that gives us a little bit of a clue that, okay, Mermaid Tavern is the main thing. The second main thing is the person's name, Ralph. And then we've got these other things. Now let's show you how proximity can pull these all together. All right, so we've got Mermaid Tavern, Ralph Dossier, I don't know how to say that. And then we see we've got the address and phone number all bunched and grouped together. Now, here's what's going on here, and I want you to pay particular attention. We're seeing not only which items are more important on this business card, we're also seeing how some of the elements are grouped together. So we're using visual spacing and proximity to communicate importance, priority, and association with other things on the card. Okay, so we get into the next example. This is a masthead for a newsletter. the Association of Women Airline Pilots, all the latest buzz from the cockpit, August 2005. And you'll see as we go to the updated version, here's what we've got. From the cockpit has now taken on a bolder look. It becomes the focal center point of the top of the masthead. And I think it would be the focal center point on the first version, but now you see we've got all the latest buzz. In the first example, all the latest buzz is sort of snagged up there on the Association of Women Airline Pilots. So the proximity is creating a confusing and misleading connection between those two things. All the latest buzz from the cockpit goes together better. And then we take these sort of administrative details. Here's who we are, the Association of Women Airline Pilots, and the date and the volume and so forth. We've also taken in this case and done a couple of other things that are interesting. We've made the picture of the airplane bigger, and it extends beyond the border of the square, which now has squared off edges. It's actually a rectangle instead of rounded edges, and it just looks more visually interesting. So proximity will, again, allow us to see what things go with what, and it visually guides us through the process. Pretty simple example, but you would think that this being such a simple example, that this is something that people would just naturally, intuitively understand. But I'm telling you, on Tuesday morning ad clinics, this idea of proximity and making it visually, instantly evident what things are and how they go together is frequently missing. So clearly what we've done here is we've made headers, and we've grouped the things that go under that header in an easy to read way. So it jumps off the page that there's 4 categories. It's clear that there's 4 categories. We can easily see what those 4 categories are. If we have additional interest in seeing what the individual elements are under each of those 4 categories, we have the option to read them. But even if we don't, this is a much easier list to deal with. Here's a flyer for a chamber concert series. As you will see, we've got all kinds of elements going clearly haywire on this sheet. Let's go ahead and put the after. This is the before. Let's put the after. So we've got the same font, chamber concert series. And in this case, the piano has been brought up so that it's bigger. It gives a visual accent. But we've also taken the 3 pieces that are going to be played, and we make them very easy to see. We've got the Alexander String Quartet, the Artaria, and Santa Rosa chamber players. We can see visually, without reading any of the details, that the information under each of the 3 headers goes with that header because of the proximity. Also, we've taken the Edgeley Junior College sort of logistic housekeeping type information. We've put it in proximity one to another, put it down there at the bottom. The only thing I might do a little bit different, I might make the tickets $10 and $8 information or ticket information a little bit bigger. So in other words, maybe over here on the right hand side, we could put ticket information, $10 and $8 for ticket information, call this phone number. Now here's a third version of this. It's approximately the same. The difference is that we've now taken this piano clip art and we made it a little bit smaller so that it's not interfering with the text. I'm going to go back so you can see it interfering with the text. Ready? Interfering, not interfering, interfering, not interfering. I think that either one of those would probably be okay. The proximity is the major issue that we want to deal with there, okay? Here's a sign for a garage sale. Again, I'm not suggesting that you would make a sign that looks like this, but based on my history of doing many, many, many Tuesday morning ad clinics, I would say there's a reasonable possibility that you might, okay? So what do you want people to know? Well, you want them to know that there's a garage sale. You want them to know what kinds of things are available. You want them to know where it's happening, and you want them to know that there's free coffee and donuts. Let's see if we can do something about that. Garage sale, you see right under the garage sale, we know when it is, where it is, and then we've also got free coffee and donuts along with a list of those things. Now, we might want to put some bullet points on there, but I think it gives a good idea, okay? Proximity. All right, Here's another flyer, and this is a flyer trying to get people to sign up to learn how to be cowboys. How about it, partner? How would you like to wake up with the sun, pour yourself a cup of coffee, gaze out upon the open range? Can you imagine? What if you could? And here you'll see as we rearrange these items. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you look at this a little bit more carefully, you'll see that we're using some alignment, which we're going to get to and talk about here in just a minute. We flushed everything to the left, and by doing so, we've more visually, specifically divided up this text. So look what we've done. How would you like to? Part of the problem with the original one on the left is you've got too much space. How would you like to? And then a space, and then the list of stuff, and then another space, and then can you imagine, and then another space. And in the second version on the right, you'll see that we've moved up how would you like to close to the things that we'd like them to consider. Can you imagine? And then we put that very close to the things we'd like them to consider. This becomes visually very easy to read relative to the one on the left. Now, also we've made the cowboy with the lasso visually more interesting by bringing it bigger. We've moved the text over to the left to make room for this cowboy with the lasso. It's all possible. Live the life you've dreamed about, be a cowboy. And I think you would agree that on the left-hand side, that text really just sort of gets buried because visually it's all connected to all the centered stuff above it. Also, what you're supposed to do has now been, via proximity, brought down to the bottom. Again, just more examples of how this proximity plays a role. Okay, this has more elements going wrong with it than I care to elaborate on. The major thing that has going wrong for it is a bunch of all capital letters. We will talk in a future episode of this discussion on this book about capital letters and how they can kill your ability to have people read your stuff. But I think this is a pretty good exhibit of that right here, right now. Let's take a look at a way to rearrange this. Well, let me ask you this. How would you rearrange this? Think about it for a minute. Well, here we go. Never before in Galleria history, we've taken this header that is really sort of jammed and buried and hard to read, and we've made it visually pop off. We've taken 3 different paragraphs of text instead of one giant paragraph of text, and we've taken the information about where it is and what it is and who's affiliated with it, and we've created a proximity grouping down on the lower right-hand corner. In addition, we've also created a grouping on the left so that the person can visually quickly look at this. Now, I think it's interesting on this particular piece to notice what's going on here. We've got 3 major elements that are broken down into different proximities. We've got the top with the headline and the text, and that is subdivided into the header and then 3 paragraphs, which makes it relatively easy to read. Then we've got visually, the second thing that the eye is going to look at is the grouping on the bottom right, and then it'll sort of ease over to the stuff on the bottom left. And that's how the eye is going to be pulled on this particular piece. We've done this with proximity. Okay. Also, there's some elements there of alignment. We'll talk about alignment here in just a minute. So let's look at one more example of proximity, and then we'll move on to alignment. This is a sort of very basic web page. Luddites are us, and you'll see that we've got sort of just a bunch of information kind of scattered on this. A little bit hard to read. Let's look at a better way of doing this maybe. So we've got the header at the top still. Now we've taken the 3 major elements about us, our mission, our history, our philosophy, current topics, and we've created a navigation on the left. Then we've also created a smaller group of text that's not as spaced out. Look at the one on the left. Look how spaced out it is. Those extra spaces make that pretty daunting and difficult to read. We've also taken the Henry David Thoreau quote, we've pulled it apart and made it its own element, which makes it, of course, much easier to read. So that's proximity. Let's move on and talk about alignment. Let's take a look at a few different elements of this same business card that we looked at before. The original one from the previous example is on the upper left. The one that we ended up with is on the upper right, Mermaid Tavern with Ralph Doyster, I guess it would be his name. But now let's play with some alignment. And you'll see here on the right, the bottom right and the bottom left, it's actually the same one. I'm not sure why I have it on there twice, to be honest with you. One of them I just drew a line, I guess, so you can see that we've now right justified this. The right justification just gives it a little bit of an air of sophistication. Also, this makes it look a little bit cooler. Let's take a look at this business plan for Redhead Enterprises. On the one on the right, you will see that we've made Redhead Enterprises a little bit bigger. So we've got some gosh, I can't think of my word all of a sudden, contrast, thank you. We've got some contrast there. Also, we pulled down the by Shannon Williams and the date so that it's clearly, via proximity, its own element, but also we pulled this stuff all over to the left-hand alignment, so it just looks a little bit more professional. Okay, here's some other examples. It's not necessarily to say that centering things is wrong or bad. Certainly that is not the case, but sometimes pulling things over to the left or to the right can make it visually more interesting. And realistically, the underlying theme that we're trying to accomplish with all of this is to make things more visually interesting so that people won't just quickly gloss over it because it's visually boring. Okay, so in terms of alignment, flush left or flush right, centered, I think I want to focus in on the centered. It says this text is centered. If you're going to center text, make it obvious. And then right below that, you'll see it says, see, this paragraph is difficult to tell if the text was centered purposefully or perhaps accidentally. The line lengths are not the same, but they're not really different. You can't instantly tell that the type is centered. So compare the bottom set of centered type to the top set of centered type, and you'll see that by having clearly, obviously different lengths of lines, that centering becomes more pronounced, more obvious, easier to read, and it accomplishes its purpose better. At the very bottom is full justification. This is where it's lined up on the right and the left-hand side, but there is a warning there at the bottom that don't do it unless your line length is long enough to avoid awkward gaps between the words. So a lot of times what will happen is your word processor will take the last line there and it'll push the last line so that it's not fully justified. That's really what you're looking for there. So now we're going to look at a combination of different alignments. We've got a left alignment on the top and a center on the bottom on this first example. On the second example, we've got the left alignment on both words, Robert Burns, poems in Scots and English, and we've now moved it, the bottom group, the proximity is still the same, but now we moved it over to the right. This gives us a little bit more visual distinction and makes it look a little bit more interesting. I like that second one a little bit better, Robert Burns being put on two separate lines instead of one. A lot of times in my experience with this kind of stuff, it helps to just sit there and look at it both ways. So let's take Robert and Burns and put it on the same line. Now let's take it and put it on separate lines and let's see which one looks the best. Sometimes it's kind of hard to describe, but it's helpful if you understand these principles so that you can at least know different things to attempt. Otherwise, you will be short on things to evaluate and you might be stuck with something that's not that great simply because you didn't know what else to compare it against or to look at instead. Okay, does that make sense? Probably makes a little bit of sense. Okay, the one on the left, this is one where we've got a bunch of centered text that doesn't really seem to make much sense. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one. This one, though, I do want to spend some time on. This is contrast. This is a great principle. This is one that most people do not have a very good handle on. So I'd like you to, make in your notes, this is something to pay a little bit closer attention to. Look at the one on the left versus the one on the right. We've reversed the type, of course, on the one on the right. It jumps out. It's another newsletter. We've also used much thicker, darker, bolder headlines so that it jumps off the page. So now on the one on the right quickly communicates that there is another newsletter with 4 different headers. You'll also see that the headlines have a larger font that are instantly visually dominant to the subheadlines. And you'll see if you look at anything that MYM ever does in terms of graphic design and so forth, this is a staple of what we do, is using font size and thickness to quickly communicate differences in dominant versus submissive headlines. So keep that in mind. You may want to go look at some of the examples of things that you've seen us do or perhaps done for your business to get some ideas on that. Okay, let's take a look at this resume. The one on the left is a pretty standard looking resume with the objective and work experience, education. But if we take and add a few elements, first of all, we've left align this. We've also created proximity by taking some of the important elements and grouping them. We've also added lines to help emphasize the proximity and the elements that go together. You can very quickly see that we've got the subcategories of objective, work experience, education, professional affiliation, and hobbies. Now, what I'm hoping that you're taking away from all of this as we go through this, I think it would be very easy to look at the one on the left and the one on the right and to say to yourself, well, that's pretty obvious. You know, the one on the right looks better. But again, the key here is to understand these principles so that when you're doing something different that's not necessarily a resume, you can take these tools, put them into your bag of tricks, and implement them on behalf of whatever project you happen to be working on at a given time. Okay? The lines, the thickness, also you'll see here under work experience, we've got the dates over here on the left. We've got bolded headers, math teacher and football coach, assistant manager, math teacher, football coach, manager. It's easy for the reader. We're assisting, we're essentially acting like a traffic cop with these elements of contrast, alignment, proximity to allow the person to quickly and easily see what we want them to see instead of a big blob of text like we have on the left. Okay, example here, the rules of life. Part of the problem with this is we've got thick lines that really seem to be about the same as one another. But if you look at the one on the bottom, you'll see that we've got a thick line under the rules of life. We've also brought the header up so that it's thicker. The lines between each of the elements of, or each of, I guess you could call the rules of life, is still there, but it's much thinner. It gives it an interesting look, but it doesn't confuse the person by making everything look visually the same. Okay, it's quite clear here that there are, what, about 5 different rules of life. We can easily see what they are, and we can see where the end of that is because we've created a thicker line. In fact, you'll see that the line at the end is not quite so thick as the one at the top. So that's sort of an interesting element that you can look at. Next, well, I'll let you just look at that one for a second, and I want you to identify as many elements of contrast, proximity, and alignment that we've just talked about and see what you can come up with. Go ahead and look at that. I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Go. Okay, so what did you come up with? Well, clearly we've got contrast here. We've got proximity. It's easy to see what the various elements are. We've got left alignments on each of the paragraphs. We've got the lines that we looked at before at the bottom and at the top that separates things. So this is a really good way. I mean, I want you to consider how much text is on this flyer and how easy it is to work through it, even though there's a tremendous amount of text. I can quickly see, what is it? Am I invited? Can I bring a friend? What do we do there? Can I get more involved? When? Where? Does it cost money? Everything is easy to read, even though, like I said earlier, there is a tremendous amount of text going on here. You know, one of the things that you really have to guard against is text overload. A lot of times people will get bogged down on the amount of text. They'll try to create rules that say you can have a lot of text, or you can't have a lot of text, or a lot of text is good, or a lot of text is bad. And the real reality is it generally is not a matter of how much text, but how easy it is to filter through and read and pick out what you want from the text. And that's what these principles are designed to do. Okay, let's take a look at another example, the construction network. We've got the Eagle coat of arms, remodel and repair specialist, residential and commercial additions, alterations, baths, kitchens, decks, small jobs, etc. Same information, but now we bring out much more pronounced construction network. We see that they do remodel and repair specialist, residential and commercial, and then a list of the different kinds of things that they do that's easy to see. The proximity of the phone number and free estimates and license number, it just becomes very much easier to see what's going on here. We've cut the number of logos down from 4 to 1, probably helps out as well. All right, now we saw this one earlier, remember? So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a better looking header using contrast. So check this out. How about it, partner? How'd you like to? And you see now we've brought up the thickness of the font, not only on the headline, but on each of the subheadlines. And we've actually created this Be a Cowboy, which is much bigger. Now, look, that was an element that originally was just text sort of jammed at the very end of it. How about it, partner? Be a cowboy. And we've actually made the picture of the cowboy larger, but we've made it more of a watermark. This is an interesting element of this flyer, but I like this example because what I want you to notice is we took the original one that was pretty hard to read. We made one that was better, but I think as we continue to layer on some of these elements, you can make it better and better even still, okay? All right, using contrast, what could we do for this particular one? We've got the dog, and I'm going to go ahead and put this on here, and I want you to take a quick look. All right, what do you think about that? Okay, gave you just a second to look at that. Clearly, we've got the reversed out header. It says woof. It makes it clear that woof is the header, not just some random word there. Same picture of the dog. Take a hike, but before hitting the gorgeous Northwest trails with your four-legged friend, hike on over to Woof for food and gear. Okay, a dog bakery, gallery, and outfitter. See, that's very difficult to tell on the original one on the left. It's difficult to tell what it is they even do, but because we've used proximity and the contrast, you can see just a lot easier to sort through this. Okay, again, the underlying principle behind all of this is we're trying to enhance readability by making things just a little bit easier to look at and to see. Okay, and then we'll go through one more example here, and then I think we're just going to be done. We're going to have a quick session today. So the next one is our Luddites Are Us website. If you remember, we took this and made it a little bit easier to see by the proximity on the left-hand side and the navigation, also into the text area. So now we'll come in here and we'll use a lot of contrast by reversing out that top. We've now got thicker about us, current topics, contact us. We've actually brought the picture of the guy up a little bit bigger, and we've actually made the text a tiny bit smaller, not a ton. In fact, maybe it's about the same, but the contrast there definitely makes this more visually appealing, easier on the eyes, easier to read. So that is the principle of contrast. What we've covered today is proximity, alignment, contrast. Let me see here. Maybe we'll get a little bit into typography. Let me see if I can pull that up. I think we got a little bit of time here, so let's do it. Okay, hang on one second, and I'll pull that up. All right, here it comes. Okay, designing with type. Let's talk about this just for a little bit. Okay, now we're getting into the second half of the book, as you'll see there, specifically with type, since Type is what design is all about. Yes, this section particularly addresses the problem of combining more than one typeface on the page. Although I focus on the aesthetics of type, never forget that your purpose is communication. The type should never inhibit the communication. So let's get into a couple principles of designing with type. And this is the bigger topic is just called typography. Okay, now this gets a little bit technical, but let's go through it. Concordant relationship occurs where you use only one type family without much variety in size, style, weight, and so on. It's easy to keep the page harmonious, and the arrangement tends to appear quiet and rather sedate or formal, sometimes downright dull. Conflicting relationships occurs when you combine typefaces that are similar in size, style, weight. The similarities are disturbing because visual attractions are not the same, neither are they different. So they conflict. Contrasting occurs when you combine separate typefaces and elements that are clearly distinct from each other. The visually appealing and exciting designs that attract your attention typically have a lot of contrast built in, and the contrasts are emphasized. So what the heck do you mean? Whoops. Most designers tend to wing it when combining more than one typeface on a page. You might have a sense that one face needs to be larger or an element needs to be bolder. However, when you recognize and name the contrast, you have power over them, and you can get to the root of conflicting problems faster and find more interesting solutions. That's the point of this section. So in other words, not to just look at something and sort of say, well, it looks okay, but if you can verbalize what those issues are, then you can control it. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Concord. Okay, like we just said, one typeface, other elements have same or similar qualities of that typeface. Maybe italics are used, maybe a larger header, but the basic impression is still concordant. Most concordant designs are calm and formal. That doesn't mean it's undesirable, just the impression is going to be more calm and maybe boring, okay? So here's an example. We've got the same font. We do use a italics. Now, here on the left, Concord, we've got a bolder font. It's different sizes, but it's all the same. Over here on the right, we've got the same font, but I think you'll agree that the one on the right becomes a little bit difficult to read because everything is so similar. I think we could use some contrast here to make this a little bit easier to read. Conflict, okay? Two different sets of typefaces. Concord is solid. Conflict should be avoided. You'll see here we've got full of sound and fury. We've used a whole different font here that doesn't really seem to make sense in this sentence here. Conflict. What's up? We've got this font. We've got a very plain font here. Down here at the bottom, we've got this sort of fancy font and even fancier font. And then, you know, this original font, they just don't seem to go together. Contrast by, well, let's see what Herman Melville says. There's no quality in this world that is not what it is merely by contrast. Nothing exists in itself, okay? So if we take the same example where we originally did an italics, and then the second example we put a completely different font, now Full of Sound and Fury has a font that looks a little bit full of sound and fury. It draws attention to that, and it allows the reader to see that that's what we want them to focus on, okay? You'll see that that font is completely different and has nothing to do with the first font, which draws attention to it in a positive way, okay? Hello, big font. My name is, etc. You're cordially invited. Popeye and olive oil, and then we've got some proximity elements here that are also helping with this. So the Popeye and olive oil pops out of that so you can see what's going on. Categories of type, just something for you to look at: old style, modern, slab serif, sans serif. And if you understand the word serif, it means these little things that come off, like on the slab serif. You'll see at the top of the L, it's got this little serif. I don't know what else to call it, but a serif, that's what it is. Sans serif does not have those. Script, more of a formal looking thing, decorative, okay? So let's take a look at old style, some of the names of fonts at the bottom, but you'll see diagonal stress, the serif, It's pronounced serif, just letting you know that. Modern, thick transition in the strokes. And here are some of the examples. Now, how many fonts are there? Answer, there are hundreds and probably thousands of fonts, but this is giving you an idea. Based on hand lettering of scribes, always has serifs, angled on lowercase, has some thicker and thinner parts. The diagonal stresses means that the lines are through the thinnest parts. Doesn't call attention to itself. Great for large boxes of text, doesn't get in the way of reading. Use this when you want actually people to read it. Okay. Now modern though is going to be a little bit different. Modern is going to have a vertical stress instead of a diagonal stress. So it goes up and down. Serif on lowercase letters. Radical, thick, thin transitions in the strokes. Okay. And you can see down here at the bottom some of these examples written in those fonts are different versions of modern fonts. And you'll see that they all share these same elements. Horizontal, like I just said, mechanical looking, radical, thick and thin transitions, perfectly vertical stresses, cold, elegant look, modern, right? Just think about modern furniture. Not good for extended amounts of copies. Too hard to read. But if you want a good striking appearance, especially when it's set large, that's going to do the thing. Okay, slab serif. Examples here. Slab serif, very little or no transition, originally designed to be more readable from a distance for advertising, generally easy to read, suitable for large blocks of text. Use it a lot of times in children's books. It's clean, it's straightforward. So let's go back, let you see the slab serif. All right, there it is. And there's some examples of it. Clarendon, Memphis Extra Bold, New Century School Book. Again, generally used in kids' books. Okay, now sans serif, no stress because there's no thick or thin. Everything is the same. No serifs anywhere, no thick, thin transitions. And you can see some different examples of the sans serif down there below. Characteristics of sans serif, of course, no serifs. Mono weight, no visible thick, thin transitions. Be careful when using sans serif fonts that do feature thick, thin transitions because they don't mix well with other fonts. Okay, so take a look on the right. Ever notice what the heck is always the right decision, not mixing very well with that font. Okay, script, pretty straightforward. These are some scripty looking fonts. Been written by a brush, pen, pencil. At least they have that appearance. Many different varieties. We'll just call them script, okay? It's like cheesecake. Use sparingly so people don't get sick. You don't want to overdo it with the cheesecake or the script fonts. Don't use in large blocks and never all caps. It's difficult to read, but it can be stunning when set large, okay? And then decorative are going to be some of these sort of interesting, weird fonts. If you go to a website called dafont.com, you can see hundreds and hundreds of interesting decorative fonts. Decorative fonts, fun, distinctive, easy to use. Their power, you need to use them sparingly. Otherwise, you're going to overdo it. You're going to overwhelm the reader. Evoke emotions, communicate themes. Don't be afraid to try in settings that don't seem like they'd be appropriate, okay? So here's the typeface quiz. Match these up. What do you think? At the rodeo, I'm going to say is decorative. High society looks like it is probably, what do you think? Well, we know for sure too sassy for words is going to be script. It's your attitude is going to be sans serif. So that leaves us with this, the enigma continues is going to be a slab serif. Modern is going to be as I remember Adam, and then high society then would be which one? Oh, modern. Yep, there we go. Okay. I almost failed my own quiz. Quiz 4, thick thin transitions. Do the following. A, moderate thick thin transitions. B, radical thick thin transitions. C, no negligible thick thin transitions. So we've got very radical on giggle. Jiggle has none. Diggle has minor. Piggle has, I would say, moderate. Higgle has none, and Wiggle has radical. So just, again, trying to help you recognize what it is that you're using so you can make those decisions. Last words on type fonts, then we'll get into some examples. Ascenders, the parts of letters that are taller than the X height. X height, the letter of the main body of lowercase letters. Descenders, things that go below, okay? That's probably pretty obvious. So you just, for your information on that, type, contrast, size, weight, structure, form, direction, and color. And I think actually what we're going to do is we're going to pause here, and we'll pick this up later when we come back to this next month for our part 2 of this conversation. We'll talk about type contrast. Now, in the meanwhile, if you want to go purchase this book, not a bad idea. Again, if you're serious about this stuff, you really need to learn it. This webinar is a good resource to get you started. The book would be a better resource to really help you understand some of these elements. So we're going to go ahead and end up there. We're already sort of a little bit of the way into part 2, but we'll finish up part 2 and go through several other elements when we pick this up next time. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time. See ya. Bye now.